I had always thought our love was unbreakable. From the first time we met, everything felt destined. The way he smiled, the way his eyes met mine with an intensity that made everything else in the world disappear, it was magic. I felt like I had found my person, the one I could share my entire life with. There's comfort in the way we fit together, like two puzzle pieces that had been searching for each other. We talked for hours, laughed about nothing, and shared our dreams, both big and small. It felt as though nothing could ever come between us. At first, everything seemed perfect. I had never been happier. We spent weekends away, stayed up late talking, and built a routine together that felt like home. I thought we were invincible. In the mornings, I'd wake up with a smile just knowing he'd be there beside me, and when he left for work, I'd eagerly wait for his return, counting down the minutes. I couldn't imagine a future without him. But slowly, without me realizing it, things began to change. It was subtle at first, small things that didn't seem important. A text that went unanswered for a few hours. A phone call that he'd cut short. I convinced myself that it was just the stress of work or that he was tired. I didn't want to see the signs. There was a certain comfort in living in denial, in holding on to the illusion that everything was still the same. But the cracks began to widen, even if I didn't want to acknowledge them. He began to withdraw, emotionally distant, even when we were physically together. It wasn't just the lack of affection, it was more than that. He didn't look at me the same way anymore. The spark that once lit up his face when we shared a moment seemed to fade, replaced by a distant, almost disinterested gaze. Conversations that were once filled with warmth and curiosity turned into awkward silences or short exchanges. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself it was probably nothing. People go through phases, I thought. Relationships have their ups and downs. Maybe this was just one of those downs. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every time he came home late, I wondered where he had been. Every time he seemed preoccupied, I wondered who or what had caught his attention. I could no longer ignore the subtle changes, the distance between us that had slowly grown over time. Yet I told myself it was nothing. After all, we had been through so much together. Love like ours didn't fade. Or at least I didn't want to believe it could. The more I tried to fix things, the more I realized that nothing was working. I'd planned surprise dates, hoping to reignite the spark, but they always seemed to fall flat. He would smile, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. There was always an excuse. Work was stressful. He was tired. He had too much on his plate. I kept telling myself it would get better, that things would return to normal. But they never did. There was a growing void between us, a space that neither of us seemed able to fill. I felt like I was losing him, but I couldn't understand why. The love we once shared seemed to be slipping through my fingers, and yet I kept holding on, hoping for something that I couldn't even name. My heart ached every day, but I didn't know how to fix it. How do you fix something when the person you love isn't even willing to acknowledge that anything's wrong? The hardest part was realizing that I was no longer a priority in his life. I would wait for him to reach out, to show me the love that once felt effortless, but it never came. Every time I tried to talk about it, he'd brush me off, saying I was overreacting, that I was just being insecure. He couldn't see the pain in my eyes, the hurt in my heart. He couldn't see the growing distance between us. And I didn't know how to make him see. I wanted to believe that things would go back to the way they were, that we could somehow rediscover the love we once had. But the reality was staring me in the face. We weren't the same anymore. We weren't the couple that had fallen so easily into love. We weren't the people who could stay up all night talking about our dreams. We were strangers, living under the same roof, pretending everything was fine when it was anything but. And though I didn't want to admit it, the thought of losing him, of losing US, was unbearable. But what could I do? I tried everything I could think of to bring him back to me. I tried being patient, understanding, supportive. I tried to reignite the passion, the affection, the connection. But nothing seemed to work. Every time I reached out, he pulled away. The love that had once felt so certain now felt like a distant memory. And the worst part was that I wasn't sure I was the only one who felt it. In the silence of our home, I began to wonder, was this the end? Had we already said goodbye, without even realizing it? As time went on, the cracks in our relationship grew more visible, though I continued to deny it. I tried convincing myself that the changes weren't significant, that everything would go back to normal if I just gave it more time. But the feeling of unease in my chest wouldn't go away. Each passing day made it harder to ignore the distance between us. It wasn't just his behavior, it was the way I started to feel invisible in my own relationship. He started working longer hours, sometimes even on weekends. The late nights at the office turned into excuses for missing dinners or not coming home until after midnight. When I asked him about it, he always had a reason, a project, a deadline, an urgent matter. His explanations always sounded plausible, but there was something in the way he said it that didn't sit right with me. It was too rehearsed, too convenient. There were no real apologies, no sense of regret for leaving me alone. The affection I had once taken for granted was also fading. He stopped surprising me with sweet gestures or thoughtful words. I had grown so used to him holding my hand when we walked together, the gentle kisses he'd place on my forehead, and the moments where he'd look at me like I was the most important person in the room. But those moments became rare. He seemed distracted, distant. Sometimes, when I tried to kiss him or show affection, he would quickly pull away, brushing it off with an excuse that he was just tired or needed space. I began to feel like a ghost in my own life. His presence felt more like an obligation than a source of comfort. The laughter we used to share had vanished, replaced by awkward silences. When we did talk, it was as if we were two strangers discussing trivial things, avoiding the deeper issues. Even when we did spend time together, I noticed that his attention was always elsewhere. He would check his phone constantly, looking at texts or scrolling through emails, never truly present in the moment. I wondered if he even realized what he was doing, or if he simply didn't care anymore. The worst part was the guilt. I couldn't help but feel that something was wrong, yet I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Was I imagining it? Was I just being paranoid? Was I overreacting to small things that could easily be explained away? I asked myself these questions repeatedly, trying to rationalize the growing discomfort I felt. I started second-guessing everything. Maybe I wasn't as understanding as I thought. Maybe I was the one who was distant or too demanding. But deep down, I knew I was only feeling this way because something had shifted in. It was a Thursday when everything came crashing down. I had been feeling the distance between us for weeks, but that day, it hit me like a wave I couldn't escape. I walked into our living room to find his phone on the coffee table. It had buzzed twice, and something in me told me to look at it. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it was a breach of trust, but my instinct screamed that something was wrong. I picked it up, heart pounding, and saw her name on the screen, Sarah. The same name that I had seen pop up a few times in passing, but had brushed off as nothing more than a colleague or a friend. The messages weren't long, just quick exchanges, but the tone was unmistakable. The kind of messages you send when you're too comfortable with someone. There was one that stood out. I can't wait to see you tonight. My hands began to shake. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, trying to process the words in front of me. I knew what it meant, but I refused to accept it. He wasn't capable of this. Not him. Not us. But deep down, I felt the weight of reality crushing me. The doubt I had been ignoring, the whispers that I had tried to drown out, were now undeniable. I wasn't imagining it. The distance, the coldness, it wasn't just stress. It was something else. My mind raced. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I tried to make sense of it all. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't I noticed sooner? I should have seen the signs, but I was too blinded by hope, by the belief that our love was invincible. But now it was clear. I had been living a lie. The person I trusted most had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I knew what I had to do. I had to confront him. No more games, no more pretending everything was fine. I needed answers, even if I wasn't ready to hear them. With trembling hands, I placed his phone back on the table and walked to our bedroom. He was in there, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking as if nothing was wrong. He had no idea that Everything had changed. I stood in the doorway, my stomach a knot of anxiety. I was scared, not just of the truth, but of how he would react. Would he deny it? Would he lie to my face? Or would he admit what he had done and shatter the last bit of trust we had? My voice was barely a whisper when I asked, "Who is Sarah?" His face immediately froze. His eyes darted away, and I saw the flicker of guilt before he regained control. He knew. He knew this moment was coming, and he didn't have an answer that could make it better. "She's just a colleague," he muttered, his voice lacking conviction. "It's nothing." I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I fought it back. I wasn't going to let him talk his way out of this. "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice stronger now. "I saw the messages. I saw what you've been saying to her. I can't wait to see you tonight. Is that nothing?" He stood up, his hands shaking. He looked guilty, but also defensive, like he was trying to protect himself from something much bigger than the truth. "It's not what you think. It was a mistake. I shouldn't have," he trailed off, unable to finish his sentence. I couldn't stop the tears that started to fall. I had known it was coming, but hearing him admit it made it feel so much worse. "How long?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How long have you been seeing her? How long have you been lying to me?" He couldn't answer at first, his eyes avoiding mine. When he finally spoke, it was with reluctance. "A few months." I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. "A few months," I repeated, the words sinking into me like shards of glass. "A few months." This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. He had been making decisions without me. He had been seeing someone else, talking to her, making promises to her, all while I was in the dark. My heart shattered all over again. "You never once thought to tell me?" I asked, the pain in my chest growing with every word. "You never once thought that maybe, just maybe, I deserved to know? You could have ended it. You could have been honest with me. But instead, you kept lying." He tried to reach out to me, but I stepped back, not wanting to feel his touch, not wanting him to try and fix something that was already broken beyond repair. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "I don't want to lose you." But that was the problem. He didn't seem to understand that he already had. He had already lost me the moment he made the choice to betray me. The trust that had been the foundation of our relationship was gone, and no amount of apologies or explanations could bring it back. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I had been holding on, fighting to salvage something that wasn't even there anymore. But the truth was, I couldn't continue living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice steady now, though my heart felt like it was breaking all over again. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." He looked at me with tears in his eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a glimpse of the man I had fallen in love with. But it was too late. The damage was done. And as I walked out of the room, I knew that this would be the last time I ever trusted him. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and disbelief. I couldn't escape the thoughts that constantly haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his voice, felt the weight of his betrayal. I couldn't stop replaying the confrontation in my mind, wondering if I had done enough, if I could have seen it coming sooner. But the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that everything had changed. The love I had held so dearly had been shattered, and I was left picking up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. I spent the first few days in a state of shock, unable to process what had happened. I tried to go through the motions, eat, sleep, work, but nothing felt real. The world around me seemed distant, as if I was watching it through a thick fog. I didn't want to face anyone, didn't want to explain what had happened. I didn't have the energy to tell the people I loved what I was going through. I just wanted to be alone, to wallow in my pain, to try and figure out what came next. I thought about reaching out to him, asking for more answers, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't change anything. He had already confessed, and no more words from him could undo the hurt. There were no apologies that would make me feel whole again. What he had done was unforgivable, and even if I wanted to salvage something, I knew I couldn't. The trust that had been the foundation of everything was gone, and no amount of apologies could rebuild that. As the days turned into weeks, I started to realize that I couldn't keep living in this pain. I had to do something. I couldn't keep holding on to a relationship that had already ended. The hardest part was accepting that I had given so much of myself to someone who didn't value me the way I had valued them. I had to let go, not just of him, but of the life I had imagined with him. I had to stop clinging to the hope that things could go back to the way they were because I knew deep down that they never would. I began to focus on myself, something I hadn't done in so long. I started doing things that made me happy again, things I had forgotten about in the whirlwind of our relationship. I took long walks by